It's hot in Topeka.
So, I've made videos on Disney shows in the past, but truth be told, I'm actually more of a fan of Cartoon Network when it comes to TV shows. Cartoon Network has had a variety of different shows, all spanning across different genres that I've grown up with and loved throughout not only just my childhood, but also within my adult years as well, being an animation fanatic. Though, what show would be a good topic of discussion for Cartoon Network? I mean, I can go with a very easy popular choice like Ed, Edd n Eddy or Steven Universe, or I can go with the more relatively obscure like Robot Jones or Class of 3000. But I also feel like at this point, most of those shows have already gotten a ton of videos based around them. So I wanted to give a shout out to a show that's sort of in between. One that's popular enough to where it's remembered well, but hasn't gotten as many videos made about it. So after much debate and searching, I decided that the best option is to make a video regarding the show about
Imaginary Friends. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends is a wonderful, wonderful imagination habitation. We provide food, shelter, and a warm heart for imaginary friends looking for a place to call home. So if you know of or have an imaginary friend that desperately needs a home, then come on down to Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, where good ideas are not forgotten.
This is it!
Welcome to Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends.
Believe it or not, there was a good portion of mid-2000 Cartoon Network where I was kind of obsessed with this show. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends definitely has a lot of what I look for in a Cartoon Network original series. Surprisingly, I haven't seen as many videos talking about it, so I figured, why not take the time to celebrate what made this show so special to me at a relatively young age. A show like this did spark a lot of imagination in terms of the kinds of shows, visuals, and characters I like seeing in almost any show, even with some of the faults this series has here and there. So let's not waste too much time any further, as it's time to talk about what Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends meant to me, and why I think it still holds up relatively well as a show that captures the essence of never losing your nostalgia. So, like with most animated series, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends had to start somewhere, and no better place to start than with its creator, Craig McCracken. Of course, most people will know him best for the Powerpuff Girls, and would later go on to do shows like Wander Over Yonder and Kid Cosmic. He was a big part of Cartoon Network's identity in the late 90s and mid 2000s, collaborating on a bunch of different shows prior to Powerpuff Girls. Foster's was his second major show he created for the network, and that series had a lot of other creative talent onto it as well, including My Life as a Teenage Robot creator, Rob Renzetti, and 2010 My Little Pony creator, and Craig McCracken's own wife, Lauren Foss. Which, side note, I'm honestly kind of shocked that, for as big of a fan of her work as I am, I never actually had a brony phase during the time her version of My Little Pony came out. The show was inspired by a trip Craig and Lauren had to an animal foster shelter when they were getting a new dog. They decided, hey, what if there was a show that's about a foster home, only instead of pets or children, it's about imaginary friends. Not a bad idea, and they decided to create a world where imaginary friends actually exist in this universe. Kinda odd that there's only one foster home for these friends. How does the logistics of this world work in terms of rights for people who are technically made up but are now real? But who cares really? There's more to this show than just that, as we'll quickly discuss the pilot for a bit, which, unlike the average Cartoon Network show, this started out as a 90-minute movie. And I say, as far as pilots go, it does a really good job setting up the show's plot and characters, which time to actually introduce them, as the series is about a young boy named Mac and his imaginary friend named Blue. It starts with them getting bullied by Mac's older abusive brother, Terrence, until their mom comes home to see them wreck the place once again. Mac's mom ends up having a talk with Mac on why Terrence has been bullying him, which I have to admit, watching this show again, I'm starting to question Mac's mom's parenting habits.
But it was Terrence. He always picks on me and treats me like a baby.
And why do you think he does that?
'Cause he's a jerk.
Well, yes, but can you think of any other reasons? Maybe because of Blue?
Blue? Why?
Because, Mac, you're 8 years old, and you still have your imaginary friend.
As she thinks that Mac is getting too old to have an imaginary friend, kind of gaslighting of her to suggest that the problem is Mac's friends when he is the one getting bullied. I don't know, maybe instead of blaming your son's fighting on your innocent younger son, you should actually take the time to punish your kid who's actually being a bully. It doesn't sit right with me. We don't see her that much in this show since she works all the time, and we never see her face similar to other adults in animated shows. Regardless, you should still focus more on your other son being an absolute dick to your younger son instead of putting the blame on the victim, you no-face bitch. Anyway, Blue, being distraught on being abandoned, ends up finding a potential solution to their problems when he finds out about this foster home that actually offers a place for imaginary friends to stay in. Sounds great as they arrive to meet a big colorful cast of characters of all different shapes and sizes. The only downside is that if Blue stays in this foster home, he has a strong chance of getting adopted, meaning that Mac wouldn't be able to keep him. Fortunately, after a lot of shenanigans and seeing how loyal Mac is as a friend to Blue, they decide to let Blue stay at Foster's, with the only condition being Mac has to visit him every day, which putting a little pressure on Mac there, aren't you? I mean, what if some emergency happened where he can't come? Then again, there wouldn't be much of a show if he doesn't show up every day. And that's your basic premise for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. And with that, get an onslaught of different colorful characters appearing throughout this whole series. And I think it's now time to talk about a good majority of them right now, since they do make this show in a lot of ways. Starting off with probably the main character of this show, we probably attach ourselves to, our main human lead,
Hey, everybody.
Mac does serve as the straight man of the group, as in this show, he is kind of your average everyday kid who no one understands. Though there's a bit more to him, because while he does have a lot of the same traits you would see in other kid characters of that time, Mac at least seems more like the main voice of reason. The kid is actually fairly smart. Not a boy genius, but he's able to figure out a lot of things on his own, and is usually the one giving the advice or helping characters make the right decision. He's a good-natured kid that serves as a pretty good character and center protagonist to focus on in this series. There is one little catch to Mac that doesn't appear that often, but is incredibly notable. You see, when most people eat sugar, they risk getting diabetes. When Mac eats sugar, he becomes a fucking maniac. Whenever Matt eats sugar of any sort, this kid has the wildest sugar high, jumping around and just acting like the most obnoxious little kid on sugar you'll ever meet. It doesn't come into play until season 2, and they use this trope very sparingly, but it's a big enough of a character quirk that I feel should be at least mentioned once if I'm talking about Mac. I'm sorry, is that okay? Wait, why am I apologizing for this? I already have this guy to do the apologizing for me.
Hey, how you doing? Name's Wilt.
This is Wilt, one of the main imaginary friends on this show, and he's not hard to miss. How can you? He's so tall, and in general, he has a very unique design with not only his height and color standing out, but has some deformities with a wonky eye and only one arm. Despite that, it's never something that defines Wilt as a character, which is good because it does actually show in a positive light characters still being seen as normal despite their disabilities. It also helps that that, Wilt is honestly just a cool character. He's one of the best on this show simply for the fact that, well, he's probably the nicest character in this entire series. This is a guy who looks out for others and tries his best to make sure that everyone is pleased in any sort of way, to a point where it actually becomes a fault for him as a character, as Wilt's kindness does lead to a lot of people taking advantage of him because he never really wants to be the bad guy. In fact, I argue some of the pressure on him to be perfect does add to him trying to make sure everyone is okay. They do establish this kind of thing very well in numerous episodes, and it's neat to see them tackle this kind of character flaw. Regardless, Wilt does make for a really good character, and there's a reason why he's one of the most recognizable characters of this series. Though, enough about Wilt. I think now it's time to talk about Coco.
How are you, Julio?
Not that Coco. This Coco. Coco is one of the most interesting friends of the household. Doesn't so much act like a regular person and acts more like an animal, being this strange part bird, plant, plane hybrid. She's an incredibly hyper and overactive bird who is just a wild card of a character. She has this quirk where she lays eggs that have random prizes and are used often for random plot points and gags that are all sorts of fun. And as you can tell, Coco is the only thing she's able to say. But the friends are around her enough to know exactly what she's saying, despite it being lost for other people.
Ooh, that's much better than my idea.
I mean, I don't think I'm the only one who would admittedly like to see her having a debate with other characters who speak in a similar fashion to how she does. On the topic of different languages though, now we'll move on to the main Hispanic character of the group, Eduardo.
Sí, gracias, Coco. Usted tiene una manera con palabras.
Ed is certainly a very lovable character, as his outward appearance is just being one big hairy monster-like character. His design is meant to protect small kids from bigger threats, but in actuality, Eduardo is a very sweet, kind monster that's actually a coward when facing most threats. He cries a lot and runs away at the sight of any major trouble. He's definitely in the vein of characters like the Cowardly Lion, where his more threatening appearance is in exact contrast to who he actually is. Though Ed still manages to be a very enjoyable character to watch, especially when he does make effort to confront his fears with legit effort. I mean, he has to, since his initial purpose was to protect other small kids. So it's neat to see how they handle Ed's true act of courageousness, along with him being more emotional at points. One thing to point out is that Eduardo is actually voiced by Tom Kenny, who goes without saying, you know what characters he has voiced in the past. Though I must say, I always thought Eduardo was one of his standout voices. Namely because, no disrespect to Tom Kenny, but in most things, you can kind of tell it's him. There's always a certain kind of voice he might do for certain characters, and if you watched enough cartoons as I have, it comes to a point where he's very easy to spot out. The voice he does for Eduardo is pretty unique, since it's a deeper, more gravelly voice than we're used to from Kenny.
Sí, I love licking feet, see?
Sounds more like a Cookie Monster type, with a more Hispanic accent to it. I think Kenny pulls this off quite well, and does a good job fitting into this character. The only downside to his performance might be that, well, I'm not sure how people feel about a white guy voicing a Mexican nowadays. However, I still really like Eduardo as a character, because he really can't hurt a fly.
Sí, I'm too scared of them anyway.
Now that we're done with those three main friends, I wanted to now talk about a certain major character on this show that I've neglected to mention. Partially because, of all the characters on this show, people are very divided on this dude, and that is Bluegard Q Gazoo.
Right, or Bluey, the blue dude, El Bluderino, or hey, how about just Blue?
Now, Blue is essentially the face of Foster's in terms of its status as a show. Sure, Mac appears alongside him and has just as big of a role, but in terms of what most of the episodes are about, and he's also one of the main icons used for this show, so it's safe to say that most people associate this show with him. I mean, look at him. This character has a weirdly simple yet adorable design. Yet, when the show is often talked about nowadays, a lot of it is focused on how much people don't really like Blue. To a great extent, I do get this, because in actuality, despite being the main central character, Blue can be, let's face it, a bit of a dick. He's cocky, he's egotistical. He always wants to be the center of attention and gets really irked when things don't go his way.
Come on! No, Blue! Come on!
A lot of the episodes focus on his shenanigans throughout the series, and oftentimes being a huge troublemaker, which I'll also admit does lead to some funny moments. Even today, I still get a bit of a laugh out of those moments.
I'll take them. How much? What? For these? I don't have that kind of money. Rip-off artist?
Ow! My shin!
Yet Blue can often act way too selfish, not accepting to compromise as much, and just wants to do anything he wants without any real consequences, which I think over the years has really gotten people to dislike Blue. I remember for a while I did really like his character in some capacity for all the funny jokes and wackiness he can provide, but sometimes when I watch the show, even I can get a little irked by this bastard thanks to his attitude towards things. So, do I still like this character despite being justifiably hated by a lot in some degree? Well, I do, admittedly. Not just because he has some funny moments, but in actuality, Blue can have a bit of a heart in a decent amount of episodes. Sure, he gets selfish, and sometimes too mean, probably more often than not. But a lot of the episodes do involve him ultimately learning some sort of lesson. It's the classic Archie Bunker scenario, where a character being a prick to other character has a point, serving as a way for a lesson to be learned by this character, so he would learn to be a better person within the episode. The downside is this method is not permanent, as shows do have to retain a status quo when it's something more episodic. So Blue's jerk-like attitude isn't completely gone by the next episode, for better or for worse. Yet, when times are tough, or if he really screws up, he does feel remorse, and shows genuine care for his friends, and does make an effort to take accountability. Plus, even when he doesn't, the show makes it pretty clear that not many people tend to be on Blue's side. He still gets punished, rightfully so, at points throughout the show, so I don't personally dislike the character despite the flack he gets. One thing I will praise regarding him is the voice acting behind Blue, as he's voiced by Keith Ferguson, who I wish got more recognition when it comes to voice acting, because in the grand scheme of things, he has one of the biggest range I've heard as a voice actor. Looking through his roles, you can see he provides the voices of many other characters, including Merlucia from Kingdom Hearts, Lord Hater in Wander Over Yonder, Reaper from Overwatch, Deputy Durling from Gravity Falls, Flimheart Gomgold in the DuckTales reboot. Along with Blue, these are all very distinct voices that all completely contrast one another. The fact that he's able to make all of these characters sound unique from one another is a sign of a good voice actor, if you ask me. I guess he just has a knack for doing impressions, as he also does a decent job doing the voice of King Julian and Lightning McQueen when Sacha Baron Cohen and Owen Wilson aren't around. Speaking of Owen Wilson, he's actually a bit of an inspiration for Blue, because according to Keith Ferguson, he based Blue's mannerism and voice off of the actor and just changed the pitch of his voice, which is kind of funny to think about.
And the specs for the audition said, we're looking for somebody who's kind of like a rascal, but you love him. Think Owen Wilson, think people like that. So my agent said, well, hey, just do your Owen Wilson voice. I'm like, okay. So I walked in and I did the whole audition. I'm like, yeah, we really need to talk about this whole imaginary thing. And they wanted to bring me in to see, this guy who did the Owen Wilson voice. And then they just kept saying, can you go a little higher? Can you go a little higher? Can you go a little higher? And eventually it ended up here somehow.
Though watching the show again, I feel this is most apparent in early season 1 Blue, which is something I wanted to bring out that I always found fascinating about Blue. With the pilot, Blue wasn't really like how he is now, as being a crazy troublemaker, and instead just kind of your standard nice friend. It's almost to a point where these characters feel a little different from one another, but I guess they wanted to emphasize Blue being obsessed with chaos more so, as there wasn't much to work off of with Blue originally in the pilot. I also have another theory to why Blue became crazier later on, and that will go into talking about another aspect on why I don't really dislike Blue that much. This is because as a kid, I always remember hating this character more.
Good day, gentlemen. How may I be of assistance?
Yes, the Bunny Butler.
My good man, I will have you know that I am Mr. Herriman, the head of business affairs at this facility, and am in no way a butler or any other member of the service trade.
Jeez, fine, dude. This is Mr. Herriman, the imaginary friend who serves as the president of the house, being the one keeping things in line and giving all the orders around the house. Why don't I like this dude? Well, he is one strict rabbit. He's one of those characters who's a stick in the mud who doesn't really have a lot of fun and just bosses everyone around without really being understanding. This guy has a lot of different rules and regulations. Well, I get because it's a big house with a ton of friends. But the way he goes about seems way too authoritarian, to the point where it feels like he doesn't care about the needs of others and everything has to be his way no matter what. His rules are often way too extreme for as simple as they can be.
Master Beauregard?
No way.
May I remind you that at Foster's we use only 2 squares for each release?
Wait. 2 sheets? 2 sheets? Are you fucking mad, Mr. Herriman? Look, I get you want to conserve as much toilet paper as possible for all these friends, but 2 sheets is not going to cut it, man. Especially when you have a lot of friends of different sizes and shapes. I don't think 2 sheets is going to help Eduardo's ass. Plus, what if one of the friends have a massive diarrhea dump? That's not going to take 2 sheets to fix.
Darn rabbit ears.
Mr. Herriman wants you to have a dirty ass for the rest of your life, just so he can conserve toilet paper. F this guy. So, that brings me to my theory with why Blue is so out of control. I say it started with this very episode I'm referring to, Busted. Because of that, Blue got so frustrated with Herriman's extreme rules, he decided to do the opposite extreme by being as big of an anarchist as possible around the house. It does create for one of the show's main conflicts. So, I say it's a viable theory. Even despite my dislike for Herriman as a kid, I don't completely hate him as a character. He does have a purpose. Part of the humor does come from how out of touch he tends to be.
My name is Mr. Herriman, and I'm here to say, a hip hop, a hip hip hop. I rip and I rap and I just can't stop.
And to his credit, there are moments where he does show some genuine care for the other friends around the house. I feel like he does have a code with the imaginary friends being one himself, as an imaginary friend potentially being abandoned by their owner. I think the friends of the house do respect him in this regard, though that doesn't change his whole attitude of him acting like his way is the only way to go because he's the boss. Can get a little grating, especially with his rules. Seriously, man, 2 toilet paper sheets? That's fucking cruel. But I think this sort of code the friends have does even apply to Blue, as quite often these characters do help out and team up with one another throughout the series to their own personal gain. I think it makes sense to me, as if you really look at it, Blue was the one who convinced Mr. Herriman about giving them a chance to begin with.
If you could only find it in your big bunny heart to open up your beautiful and spacious home to this poor, rejected, hated, and unwanted imaginary friend, maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be so blue.
Very well. I shall arrange a tour for you.
Oh, wait, I think it's now time to talk about the character I've honestly been very excited to talk about. The one who's probably my favorite character in the entire series.
Miss Francis, Miss Francis, your presence is requested in the foyer. Miss Francis. I'm coming! Shush! She'll be with you momentarily.
Ah, yes, Francis Foster.
Whatever that bunny says is wrong. The name's not Francis, it's Frankie.
Right. Frankie Foster is the maid of the house, and is my pick for the best character in the whole series. Where I've grown not to like Blue as much over the years, Frankie is a character that's honestly one I would love to just hang out with. She's honestly the most chilled and laid back character in this series, as everyone gets along with her. And that's partially because, well, she makes a lot of time to get to know and have fun with all these friends in this home. No matter who they are, she almost always tries to make sure a friend's needs are met first, if they're struggling with something. She genuinely has a care for all these different characters, because she knows that's ultimately what any of these friends need. She's also a very hard worker, being the one doing a lot of the work around the house, which is another reason why I didn't care for Mr. Herriman that much. He always gave her the short end of the stick, bossing her around to do the work and not doing a damn thing himself. I always felt bad for Frankie being taken advantage of with his rules, despite her literally being the main one doing all the work. But she doesn't take up with bullshit, as she does stand up for the other friends, and is the main one to usually call out characters when they're in the wrong.
Oh yeah, it's high time that rabbit learned that all his rules are freaking you out and driving me nuts. I'm gonna let him know straight up that you busted the bust, and you shouldn't get busted for it. I mean, accidents happen, right?
She's a character that I honestly feel is hard to dislike in any capacity because of how commendable and genuine she is. Also, gotta give props to voice actress Grey Delisle, who not only fits this role very well, but I think alongside Azula, she's easily one of my favorite performances from Grey. It's interesting to note, because I remember also as a kid, the main character I associated with Grey was Vicky from Fairly OddParents, who I remember hating big time when I was younger. So it was nice to see her play a character as a kid who I genuinely liked. In fact, I think like most people who watch this show, I did also like her enough to have her be one of my fictional crushes as a kid. What? Oh, I get it. You think the only reason I like Frankie is because she's a cool punk girl that I thought was kinda cute? Please! That's not the only reason I like Frankie. I mean, sure, I've been known for liking a lot of different characters who tend to be goth, punk, or have some sort of alternative style, who happens to be attractive, and also happens to be a decent character on their own. But that doesn't mean I'm that much of a simp to put her as the best character for that reason. What kind of reviewer do you take me for?
Thanks for lending me your car, Grandma. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Frankie. Oh yeah, Frankie. She's so cool.
And hot!
She's so nice.
And hot!
She really is the best character in the whole series.
And hot!
She's so awesome. I just wanna... I'm sorry. I don't know what gotten into myself. Quick! Give me a character voiced by Grey Delisle that I'm not attracted to in any sort of way.
No! This is unacceptable!
Ah, yes, that will do. This is Duchess. This spoiled imaginary friend, who's very fancy, yet looks like something that Picasso would have made while he was drunk. Her thing is, she, much like Blue, has a gigantic ego. Except where Blue can be likable at points, Duchess was designed to be this rude, overly pretentious character that none of the other friends like. Whenever she shows up, she mostly serves her purpose as being the central point of conflict, being the one to do malicious things for her own doing, or just being a nuisance to other friends around the house. Grey Delisle does a good job making her voice sound very distinct and fitting for this character, and she serves as a decent foil for some of the friends.
This party is unauthorized, and more importantly, it is interfering with my 23 hours of beauty sleep.
And I want to shoot for 24.
There's not a lot to say about her outside of the fact that she's intentionally unlikable, and that's partially because she's not in a lot of episodes in the grand scheme of things. I mainly wanted to mention her because she did play a big role in the pilot episode, and does serve as the closest thing this series has to a main antagonist. Her, along with the character who actually ended up having the first lines in the whole series,
Wait, stop! I just want to punch you!
Taryn Terrence is Mac's older brother, and he serves his role as the main bully character on this show. His whole personality is just being a dumb, stupid teenager who likes to torment and pick on Mac. Again, that makes him intentionally unlikable, but much like Duchess, he doesn't appear in the show that much despite his big appearance in the pilot, and his appearances lessen more as the show goes on, which is fine admittedly, since there's not a whole lot to his character outside of being a big bully, though I've always dug the distinct young teenage boy voice that Tara Strong does for this character. It is a very distinct voice for her.
No stupid imaginary friend of my stupid little brother is gonna tell me how stupid I am. 'Cause I know just how stupid I...
Plus, I can't entirely put the blame on Terrence when Mac's mom doesn't do shit to stop him from bullying her other child. Seriously, punish your kids, damn it. Is there anyone else I'm missing in this big cast of main characters? Oh yes, how could I forget? Madam Foster. Sweet, lovely Madam Foster. She is the one that pretty much created the idea of making a big gigantic home to foster all of these friends who need a home. It's not just called Foster's because it is a foster home, but it's also named after her, because I guess the creators couldn't think of a better name for her, though it still works. Goes without saying that she's also the grandmother of Frankie and the person who imagined Mr. Herriman. She's a very sweet old lady who is usually pretty calm and collected, but she does have a bit of a wild side to her.
DJ, put the needle on the record! Woo-hoo-hoo! Yeah! Get down with your bad self!
She knows how to have fun despite how Mr. Herriman is otherwise, as she not only shows compassion, but also still has a young at heart attitude that does make her fun to be around. For the most part, she's sweet. Although, I do have to admit, at certain points, she can be a little mischievous in a similar way to Blue. She sometimes gets pissed off easily when things don't go her way, and sometimes she has needlessly screwed over friends for her own desires, which can make her kind of selfish at points. I get surprised whenever I see her doing some shady things, despite being seen as the most lovable old lady in existence.
Now, Wilt, honey, I sure appreciate the spit and polish, but this is not basketball!
But that's the thing with Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends that I really wanted to mention in this video. When watching this show again, I really took notice on something that people have stated about this show. The fact that some characters can be a bit unlikable because of how much of a jerk they might be. I know people who haven't liked Foster's that much because of this fact, which made me get into a strange realization when viewing this show again. Because I noticed when it comes to the casts of characters on this show, it's not just Duchess, Terrence, or even Blue or Mr. Herriman. When you really come down to this show and its characters...
You rip-off artist! Ah! Back up! I have a shoplifter on the loose! You stupid!
You're stupid!
No, you!
Come back here and I'll clean your clock!
No!
Everyone on this show is just a dick. Seriously, every other episode of Foster's deals with characters either arguing, fighting, mocking other characters, or just screwing over whoever they can for their own selfish needs. This goes to everyone, really. Not just the ones everyone complains about. Even the characters who are seen as the nice ones. Even they have their breaking point of just not giving a shit.
You'll be hurting my feelings.
You know, I was thinking about that. And the thing is, I really don't care.
It's a very odd thing to see in the grand scheme of things, yet it probably shouldn't, since it's not like other Cartoon Network shows like Ed, Edd and Eddy or Billy and Mandy didn't have a majority of characters who often act cruel to one another. I think it's odd to see here because Foster's, I felt, always advertised itself as the nice show on Cartoon Network. The one that seems like a fun time hanging out in this Foster's home with imaginary friends. Yet this show is just filled with the most selfish and cruel pricks at times.
What's wrong with you people? This isn't Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends.
Yeah, it's more like Foster's Home for a bunch of gigantic assholes. Why is this the case for a show that seems seemingly so innocent as Foster's? Well, I actually have another theory to why that's the case. And that theory will be a result of discussing the other major Cartoon Network show from Craig McCracken. The Powerpuff Girls was a show that many remember initially for its art direction. The show looked like it was something in the vein of shows in the 80s that had a very girly, cutesy aesthetic. It gave the show a vibe that's similar to shows like My Little Pony, where it's a show that's all hearts and rainbows, cause that's what girls like. But when you actually watch the show, these cutesy girls just managed to beat the shit out of everyone in the most brutal way imaginable without resulting in the gore. This was made to contrast its cutesy aesthetic to add to the humor of the show, giving off such a sweet vibe being violent as hell. So, I think that kind of mentality was made in mind for Foster's in some way, as Foster's is often compared to shows geared towards younger audiences, like Sesame Street, with the kind of cute, fun characters that are colorful and meant to be friendly, much like those characters. When in actuality, instead of learning about ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, the show is just them learning not to be complete dicks to one another. That's my theory on why the show is like this. Though, with how people don't like how Foster's turned out, I can see why some would be turned off by how jarring this might all be.
I thought you were supposed to be nice.
So that begs the question, is there still a lot to like about Foster's despite the meanness of it at points? Well, I would say honestly yes. And that's because it is admittedly for a point in most cases. As I mentioned earlier, oftentimes when characters are jerks, it's usually there for them to be the one to learn the lesson. Mainly Blue, of course. The show makes it pretty clear with how characters don't always side with one another, as there's one clearly in the right, and oftentimes when characters are dicks, they're usually punished in some sort of way by the end. How many episodes of Foster's exist where things ended pretty poorly for Blue? And it's kinda due to his own actions. Though sometimes the character's motives of being more angry are justifiable, as sometimes we see how characters are treated through in episodes, and them getting aggressively angry at it after what we see them go through being taken advantage of and whatnot. Sure, there are times where the show can get needlessly mean-spirited with some of its characters and moments. Trust me, we'll get to there. However, at the end of the day, most episodes will have them come to agreement or apologize for their actions. You can tell no matter how bad someone gets, they always feel obligated to make things better for one another and learn to live with it, because they know about the true friendship they always have. They learn to settle their differences because it's things not worth arguing about. There's a better solution to their problems. They work better as this big community, as a part of the house, or in some cases, there's just a bigger asshole in the group and they feel better to attack the guy who's been screwing things up for all of us instead of one another, which can be pretty satisfying in some episodes.
You're spending the rest of your life rotting in prison.
Arresting me? For what?
Article 254, Section 3, false advertising.
Like I said, eventually they learn how to be cooperating with one another, kind of like how real friends are in a sense. I'm sure there's always been a central point of conflict between friend groups, no matter how close you can be, and you can get to a point where the negatives are so insignificant in the grand scheme of things because of what really matters is the positive impact those you love have on you and vice versa. And frankly, if that's not a sign of a strong friendship, I don't know what is. So, now with the basic premise and main central characters out of the way, it's now time to discuss how Foster's was as a show from episode to episode and season to season. There's a lot to talk about in terms of this show progress over the years, And I think the best way to talk about that is by pointing out the animation. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends is a pretty great looking cartoon from a visual perspective. The whole show really takes advantage of being a very bright and colorful show, with the house itself just being this grand visual marvel for a TV show. Not a single room looks the same, and it adds for a lot of visual variety in set pieces. And that's also not excluding the character design as well, which are even more diverse and varied. The humans on this show do look like your typical Craig McCracken style human, and not just a Powerpuff Girl like how Cartoon Network's definition of PBG art style is. The imaginary characters all have different designs ranging from cute, monstrous, humanoid, animal-like, or sometimes they're random objects. The show really takes advantage on what can be an imaginary friend, so it opens the door for so much variety, and the look of the show represents that very well. The most interesting thing to note about the animation is that this is animated in Flash, and quite frankly, this is easily one of the best looking shows in the medium. Not to knock on all Flash animation, but it does have a negative reputation in animation at points. Mostly because most shows do it kinda poorly. I mean, when you see a Flash animated show, it tends to look very flat and not nearly as smooth as you want for animation. It seems very restrained. Like, look at how choppy it has been in the past with how characters stick out way too much in their environments to the point where they have very limited movement, making for otherwise dull looking shows. Foster's doesn't have that problem, as the characters are blended very well into their environment and move very fluidly, all having distinct movements that are fun to watch. They also make the characters look more three-dimensional at points. As early on, when characters move around, you can notice they look almost like they're CG models, giving them more dimension. I don't know if that's exactly the case, or they just did some really creative things with Flash to give these characters more dimension, but it's good to see a Flash show actually have an appealing look, especially for the time. They even managed to improve the animation as the show went along, as you see some updates including widescreen support in later season, and subtle little changes to the character designs. You might not notice it at first, as it's not super drastic, but as the series goes on, you see how certain characters have some slight adjustments, which I think leads to more expressive characters. Particularly with the human characters, as Mac and Frankie got a lot more expressive with how they move the further the show goes along. So all around, I think Foster's is a great show from its look. And I also want to briefly touch on the music as well, as every little piece of music in Foster's stands out. Each character has their own instrument or style of music that plays that represents their character quite well. And given the show's huge cast, you're getting a variety of music here.
Potatoes. Potatoes.
Foster's is a great show aesthetically, though I think now it's time to talk about the seasons and certain episodes of this show that defines these seasons. Starting with the first two seasons, they have a similar focus to what the original pilot had, giving the audience the idea of this world and characters. As I mentioned before, this is a world where imaginary friends exist, and the possibilities to what you can do with that are endless. This show definitely takes advantage of that just by how many episodes they have, especially early on, where they focus on the kind of friends that are made. Some of these include imaginary friends that were imagined by rowdy teenagers called Extremosauruses, who are just big giant monsters who are out of control and need to be restrained, or even ones like the Scribbles, who are imaginary friends created by babies that are just mindless scribbly thoughts that are only able to do one thing that you tell them to do and not much else. There's also the idea brought on of imaginary pets, where it's still a regular animal, but they do something a little bit more, like talk or shoot lasers. One of the most infamous kind of friends they bring on are imaginary food. These are friends who are imagined by hungry kids, and they let you know how much of a horrible existence it is to be just food. That was the most brutal thing to ever happen in the entire show. Poor, innocent little friend.
I will remember you.
There's also a bunch of episodes that focuses on other things to help establish the characters and certain quirks they might have, or things they might deal with. The first official episode, Store Wars, gives an idea of how Blue is without the pilot establishing him, as he's a big troublemaker who kicks people in the shin for ripping them off. Though, in some cases, they are kind of rip-off artists.
What? That's not free!
It certainly is, little buddy. The pager is free when you sign up for service.
Ow! Rip-off artist!
Other ideas are established in this show, including Adopt a Thought Saturday, a special day of Foster's where they focus on major adoption deals, which has returned in later episodes of the show. And there's also the big house party episode that establishes Mac's Sugar Rush. There's other episodes with various scenarios at hand, including a bowling one, an episode dealing with a squeaky rubber elephant, one where they start making cookies, and probably one of the most popular ones, an episode dealing with Mac and Blue trying to sabotage Frankie's love life. One of the most popular episodes of the show is Frankie, My Dear. It's a fun one for not only showcasing why everyone has a crush on her, I mean, you had one too, don't lie to yourself, but it also introduces other running gags like Orlando Blue. And it's just a fun episode in general with how Mac and Blue try to fend off any potential love interest for her, only to team up with the other potential crushes to take down Frankie's douchebag of a boyfriend, only for Frankie to not put up with his egotistical ass. See, this is why Frankie is cool. She doesn't even put up with BS from guys she finds hot, so good on her.
She's so cute when she's mad.
An interesting thing to note about this show is how it's structured, as Foster's episodes usually run a good full half hour, which is an interesting decision, mainly because most anime shows on that channel at the time would mostly prioritize having two 11-minute segments as opposed to one full half hour, unless if it's for like an action series of sorts. I always find that weird for more comedic-oriented shows, since usually Cartoon Network shows would only dedicate a full half-hour episode of their comedic show if it's some more big and grand episode. Foster's had a couple of these standard animated show format lengths, with a few 11-minute episodes, but they are really few and far between. They only happen in season 1 and 2, and that's it. Apparently there were plans for more 11-minute segments, but I guess there was more to flesh out with later episode ideas. Because from what I gathered, the short episodes that do appear were meant to be longer, but I guess there was some time constraints or something like that. Either way, it's still an interesting thing to notice, especially now when Cartoon Network would even have their story-dedicated shows be 11-minute formats. So I appreciate how Foster's did something to stand out, though the few episodes that were short for the most part are kind of fun on their own. One of them includes an episode where Terrence makes an imaginary friend known as Red.
Red.
Actually, that does bring up another major focus most episodes tend to have. A lot of episodes throughout the whole series have a friend of the week mentality where there's a concept or a character type introduced for a friend, and an episode deals with how they interact or handle them. The episode with Red is a big one worth noting, especially since a weird thing about this show, I feel like the marketing and all-around reputation of the show made some of these characters seem a lot more important than they actually are within the show. Like, occasionally I would still see Red being promoted as a character in Foster's, with how you would see him in the marketing or other spin-off related stuff. Yet, he only appeared in this one episode. That's it. You never find out if he stays at Foster's, or if he becomes better friends with Blue or anything like that. He's just there for the one episode and never shows up again. It's weird because him being an imaginary friend of Mac's brother, you would think they would include another episode with him. That tends to happen more often with characters than you would think, where they're introduced in a rather big way and even sometimes mentioned outside the show, but you never see them again outside of maybe a cameo appearance in the background. Like, remember Ivan? That imaginary friend with multiple eyes who serves as a seeing eye friend with the voice of Pleakley? You'd think he might show up again, especially when Cartoon Network sometimes act like he was a major cast member. But you never see him outside of this one episode. Or how about Uncle Pockets? His episode in particular seemed like a big deal, as he's this imaginary friend who speaks in rhymes and is the proclaimed best imaginary friend ever, at least according to the house.
I'm a professional friend, imaginary. Upon return, I'm never weary.
imaginary. I'm a professional friend imaginary. I love everyone except Gary. You know what you did. Just kidding.
He's not bad either. He even has a bit of an arc with trying not to be ashamed of still having some attachment to the kids who adopted him. But after that episode, I think they might have referenced him like once, and that's it. That's not to say Foster doesn't have recurring characters that did make an impact. I think the first one to really talk about comes all the way back from season 1.
Hi there, I'm Barry.
Barry is this small pink imaginary friend who shows up as this sweet little innocent girly friend who ends up having a major crush on Blue. Of course, Blue, being self-centered, doesn't notice her, despite what she does. However, that doesn't stop her from obsessing over him as...
Oh, I'm sorry. That seat's taken.
I'll just be a minute.
That seat's taken!
She is one crazy bitch, and gets jealous of Mac's loyalty to Blue, which leads to a fun conflict for these characters. She's another character that does get talked about a lot, since it's this really cute character who's just demonic and obsessive towards a guy who doesn't give her the time of day. I think people enjoy that contrast, and she did appear again, although not until way later into the series. There's an episode around season 5 where Barry disguises herself as this kid to lure Blue in, and Mac has to be the one to confront her about it. It's a neat episode for nothing else, seeing her make another appearance, even if it weirdly makes out Mac and Blue's friendship like they're an actual couple in a weird way. Although, if we want to talk major recurring characters in this show, there's definitely one I know you guys are familiar with, for better or for worse. I didn't mention this character earlier, but since they're almost the face of Foster's, it's time to talk about Cheese.
Daddy.
Yes, everyone who's familiar with this show knows about Cheese, whether you like it or not. Cheese is an imaginary friend of Mac's neighbor, who made his debut in season 2, and would be a recurring character to appear fairly often. His whole thing was being this naive little childlike character who unknowingly just ends up irritating the crap out of every friend in the house. And if it hasn't been cleared by now,
I like chocolate milk. I like cereal.
He likes chocolate milk and cereal. The appeal of his humor is seeing how all the friends would get annoyed with him. And also, as I mentioned in my teacher's pet video, there was an appeal of characters acting stupid, and that being a part of the joke, being a big part of the 2000s in animated shows. Despite only appearing in a handful of episodes, Cheese really caught on, as when this show was advertised on Cartoon Network circa 2006, he would be the main face you would see for the show. A lot of people found Cheese's humor very funny, as he was at the height of the lol so random humor trope we saw a lot of in the 2000s, which, yeah, he's very much a product of. Though I've talked to plenty of people who also found Cheese's antics just as annoying as the characters in the show itself do. Him being plastered everywhere didn't help much either, so I can see why people would be annoyed by him. But do I hate Cheese? Well, no. As I mentioned before, he was a character of the time for animated shows, and despite his annoyance, there have been times I found Cheese's antics to be either cute or funny in their own way. Cheese ultimately acts like a child, and he's not as intentionally mean like the other characters are. He does have this charm, being kind of this cute, naive character that can have his funny moments. Plus, I'm gonna be real with you all. When he first appeared, I thought this was the funniest shit back when I was like 11 years old. This was my Pickle Rick of back in the day. Though even as someone who doesn't hate Cheese, this character did eventually wear out on me. Being the face of Cartoon Network for a while didn't help, but I think the real tipping point where I felt Cheese was overstaying his welcome was with the season 5 episode, Cheese A Go-Go. This episode was a part of Cartoon Network Invasion. Yeah, remember when a couple of CN shows would have this big event crossover where each episode would deal with aliens being involved? It was a neat thing. Unfortunately, the episode from Foster's is probably the weakest one of that bunch, and honestly one of the weakest Foster episodes. Why? Well, that's because
Gotta go, 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 gotta go.
the whole episode it's just Cheese saying gotta go, and that's it.
That's the joke.
It's not funny. There's not really a punchline to it. It's just Cheese saying the same thing over and over again with nothing new. Kind of annoying if I'm being frank. Look, say what you will about Cheese in the other episodes, at least they got him to do or say different things in each one.
I have braces. You found it on the ground, didn't you? Garbage can.
Even despite the backlash Cheese can have for some people, I wouldn't call him one of the most hated Foster's characters. Even in terms of recurring or one-off characters, there have been a decent amount who have gotten some major hate, and for good reason. I'm sure all of you guys remember this asshole. Bendy is a contender for most hated character on this show. His whole thing is that when he comes to the house, he breaks shit and causes so much trouble. But when he's confronted about it,
He did it!
Bendy?
Me? But I would never. I mean, oh gosh. Oh no. Why does this keep happening to me?
this Dr. Seuss looking jackass just cries and blames it on the other person who didn't do it. But of course, the innocent one gets in trouble instead of the piece of shit who started this whole mess. I can tell you, that's something that will never not frustrate me. He only appeared in one episode, but even that was too much for fans of this show. You know it's bad when people are siding more with Blue on an episode than anyone else. Yet despite the hate Bendy gets, I argue there's a character that I think is worse than him that appeared in one episode, and that's this motherfucker right here.
Can I help you?
In the episode, Foster's Home for Make-em-Up Pals, this character, named Goofball, comes in to stay at the house. But Frankie is very suspicious about him. That's because, well, look at him. This is just a dude wearing a clown nose. He seems like someone who's just impersonating an imaginary friend. But Mr. Herriman and all the other friends are on his side because they gotta accept imaginary friends no matter what. And this episode might be my pick for the worst episode in the whole series. The first half of season 3 had a decent amount of episodes that seemed needlessly cruel, and this is the peak of that because the whole episode is just Goofball screwing things up for Frankie and making her job 100 times harder. She's on the Goofball scheme and tries to catch on to the act, only for her to get in trouble, despite the fact that this asshole is being a lazy, good-for-nothing slob who's making Frankie do all the work. It gets worse when Frankie's antics of trying to catch him on the act gets her into trouble where she's prevented from going to a concert she really wants to go to. She's too good to deserve this treatment throughout the episode. But guess who ends up going instead?
Yeah, Frankie. Too bad you missed it.
Oh, now you're gonna get it.
I knew it! Undeniable proof that you are not an imaginary...
Are you fucking kidding me? You mean this whole time this guy was an actual imaginary friend and just didn't take his stupid clown nose off the show that he was? And don't give me this, oh, he just has a different way of talking bullshit that's not even that funny to begin with. That doesn't excuse all of the poor treatment he gave to possibly the coolest character on this show, especially taunting her about missing the concert. You know how expensive tickets are?
I really am sorry.
Hey, no worries, Franny.
Oh no, you don't deserve some sweet sympathy ending for you, goofball, you piece of shit. Go back to Canada. Actually, no, Canada would be too good for this jackass. Good thing he never appeared again, as this guy is my pick for the most hated Foster's character, easily. He's a bigger asshole character voiced by Tom Kenny than Mussolini.
These are puppets I do not like. Shoot him!
Okay, maybe not that bad. Now, can we get a character on this show that is actually really good for a change?
I'm Goo.
You're Goo?
Oh yes! Goo! We already have a major improvement. Goo was one of the later characters to appear on the show, and she's easily one of the most unique. She's not an imaginary friend, but instead this fast-talking girl with a wild and overactive imagination. She has this chaotic energy where she has so much energy being able to imagine like 10 friends a second and tries to have a great time. She does have her faults and can be a bit much for some characters, but her wide-eyed curiosity, being fascinated by everything around her, and her being an actual helpful part of the house makes her a very likable character despite her hyper personality.
You know, there's something I want to talk to you about too. Why is your name Blue Blue? I mean, he doesn't even look like a blue. I just don't know what would ever possess you to call him Blue when he so clearly looks more like a chestnut to me.
Goo,
I mean,
can
maybe
you
it would be
listen a sec?
different if there was something about Blue.
I like Goo a lot, and her first appearance was a significant one for Foster, as it not only introduces her as a fun character, but also one that wants to try to fit in. And she does improve later on by having more control with her crazy energy that she has to offer. This episode was even nominated for an Emmy, and I think that's partially due to how much of a good first impression Goo made, as she wasn't a one-off character either. She stuck around for a ton of episodes later on. In fact, I think she appeared in more episodes than Cheese did, ironically enough. She's also another character who's voiced by Grey Delisle, and she does an excellent job at trying to keep up with this crazy momentum this character has to offer.
But you told me not to imagine any new friends ever again.
Yes, I realize, but...
I mean, never, ever, ever.
I know, but...
I mean, never, ever, 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 ever.
However, as much as I hate to admit it, if they do bring this character back in some reboot of this show, I could see them bringing in a different voice actor for this character. Mostly because, well, if Apu can't be on The Simpsons for being voiced by a white person, then I'm not sure if Goo would also return with a voice from someone else who's white. But that's not to discredit the great performance Grey gave this character, and if they do happen to give Goo a different voice actress, I just hope they can bring just as much fun, chaotic energy as Grey did. Though on that note, I also really appreciate that while Goo is a character that is black, it's never made as her main personality trait. There was never a huge deal made about how diverse this series was because she was a black character and that's it. Nor is she a stereotype, as she's not a black character who just ends up being the sassy, loud one. I mean, she's loud, but in a completely different way, as she's a very unique character in terms of black representation, especially for the time. I can't think of many black girl characters who had the personality that Goo had, and that makes her a very commendable character for me. Not just representation of different race, but I argue Goo might be a good representation of people who are neurodivergent. Watching this series again, I get the vibe that Goo has some form of ADHD or autism, but not seen in a negative light, as she manages to have those traits while still being seen as an equal member of the cast. I wish Goo got more attention in this regard, cause she's a highlight of the show, and a great character that should get more credit in regards to Fun Foster's character. In fact, since the Goo episode, Season 3 would still have plenty of really fun episodes in the mix. They're not all perfect. Some episodes come close to being great, but are kind of ruined by maybe a cop-out ending or some weak characterization at points. One that points out to my mind is the election theme episode, Setting the President. This one, everyone is starting to get real fed up with Mr. Herriman's rules, and how he doesn't seem to care about the needs of others in the House. So this leads Frankie to run for House President, leading an election between her, Herriman, and Blue. Of course, Frankie wins because she's the one everyone gets along with, and actually has a full-on plan to help make the house better, where Herriman just wants things to be the same and Blue is just utter chaos and mayhem. It's a solid episode for how they handle elections.
Okay, Mr. Herriman, same question. What would you change?
Not a thing. Everything is perfectly fine around here.
Loser.
And it's cool to see Frankie get some love in the light. Though it does kind of miss the mark with the ending, as Herriman actually moves out of the house to find a different job. Wait, couldn't he stay at the house and do a different position? Frankie eventually sees him and starts feeling bad for him, looking miserable not being at his work. So Frankie just gives the job back to him, and that always bothered me. Look, I understand you gotta make it so the status quo stays the same by the end, but Frankie was completely in the right for calling Herriman out for his authoritarian bullshit. So to see her just give the job back seems like a cop-out. I'm not sure. There needed to be at least more of a clear compromise if Herriman was going to get his job back like that. Like we see Frankie and Herriman make an agreement that he can lead as long as he isn't as extreme as he once was. Plus, also seems kind of selfish on Frankie's part, as another factor to her giving her job back to Herriman was that her pay was lower than her as a maid for the house. Couldn't you just negotiate a better pay for Madam Foster? Or something to where you can be leader? Hell, why do you need the extra money, Frankie? You live in this giant ass house for free. You don't have rent to pay. Unless Madam Foster is hiding something, making her own granddaughter pay at this place she works at.
Oh, I forgot. Here's your bonus.
Despite episodes like this missing the mark a little, there's still some really fun episodes. Some of my favorites include the one where Blue, Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco find out that a new room is available, and they all have to figure out who ends up getting the room. It's a really fun episode to see what lengths these characters will go to get the room for their selfish needs, being one of the funnier episodes of these characters being jerks to one another.
Oh, my stuff's here, so I live in the room. My stuff's here, so I live in the room.
Oh, yeah? So now you live in the trash.
It also ends on a good note because you see, despite their bickering, they end up learning that they do need and care about each other and end up still having that friendship despite their disagreements. Another highlight for me is One False Movie, where Blue ends up helping Mac with a video project for school, although ends up sabotaging it by just adding a bunch of fart noises.
Hello there, Mac. My name is Eduardo.
Apparently that worked for Mac's principal, as he thought this shit was so funny that he has Mac enter it in a film festival, which leads to Mac and Blue making their own big crazy movie. I always really like episodes of shows that focuses on filmmaking, because this shows all the possibility of what kind of jokes you can make parodying different sorts of films. The film Blue makes ends up being massive with crazy action, dance sequences, Tom Hanks, a CGI with Eduardo, which is hilarious in its own right,
Wormhole,
and so much other stuff, but uh-oh, someone recorded over the tape.
Sometimes you hear sounds that come from behind you. What do you say when you hear that?
excuse me.
And this Dora the Explorer type character didn't cut it for this audience.
We're walking through the forest.
Are they booing me? No, Blue. They're saying, Blue. Blue. Are you saying boo or blue? I was saying blue. Season 4 would end up being not too much different from Season 3, still having a lot of fun scenarios and episode ideas that still make this show a blast to watch. It's possibly even the best season. We're having some fun highlight episodes of this whole series. Some of these include one where Blue and the other imaginary friends crash Mac's apartment for a slumber party, another one where Goo and the other friends play this big pretend game where they roleplay as different characters, only for the bad guys in the roleplay to become real thanks to Goo accidentally imagining them. There's also a big one where Blue tries to throw a fake surprise party for Mac as a big prank. It's a crazy episode when you see what the whole scheme ends up being for Blue, as Mac tries to sabotage the fake surprise party, and it results in a very funny yet weirdly mean ending that's a little hilarious, albeit very cruel. As a contender for favorite episode of the whole series for me is the episode Squeeze the Day. This one, the entire Foster house ends up going to the beach for the day, all except Mac and Blue, who were intentionally left behind, which means Mac and Blue having the whole house to themselves leads to them trying to do whatever the hell they want with no restrictions till the whole house comes home. They're having trouble though, as they're trying to make the best to do the most awesome of awesome things. And it leads to a really fun episode to see these two try to make the best of an opportunity. It even ends on a great note. That whole speech Frankie has about making the most of being a kid was honestly really touching and has really stuck with me to this day. It also gave us It's Hot in Topeka, so yeah, pretty iconic episode to say the least.
It's hot in Topeka.
The fourth season of Foster ends on a pretty big note, as one of the main highlights of the series is Foster's second TV movie after the pilot, Good Wilt Hunting. This episode has a great concept, as every 5 years, Foster's has a creator reunion where all the original creators of each imaginary friend who lives there gets to visit and reunite with their old imaginary friend for the weekend. I love this idea as it really gives a good perspective on how these friends came to be by seeing the kind of person that created them. This definitely includes some of the main friends, as we find out in this special that Eduardo was created by a little girl living in a tough neighborhood who needed protection from bigger bullies. And she later grew up to be a police officer thanks to Eduardo helping her out to be brave in her own right. And Coco, well, we actually don't find out who initially imagined Coco. It's kind of one of those classic Cartoon Network mysteries in the veins of what's under Double D's hat, or what Miss Vellum's face looks like. Though there have been some explanations to what happened to Coco's creator. The theory is that Coco's creator was part of a plane crash where they ended up on a deserted island. The whereabouts of her is tragically unknown, however. Yet, this theory is very viable considering Coco's appearance, and this movie does explain that she was discovered by two scientists in the jungle. And these two, let's face it, they're just Comic Book Guy and Mandark. Just look at them. How could you not see these two and not think of those characters? Hell, they even sound a bit like them too.
Oh, you don't? You can't use parenthesized prefix notation. Oh, what a heavenly name the Eternals have blessed her with.
I'm using functional resonance imaging to analyze the levels of neural activity in the brain in response to olfactory cues, and therefore, as I said previously, none of your beeswax.
Worst episode ever.
We see the other imaginary friends with their creators as well, all except for Wilt, who, when confronted about it, acts very awkward and nervous regarding the topic. Later on, we find out that Wilt ends up running away from home to get back to his hometown. And of course, this leads to a big road trip between all the main friends to find Wilt with the typical Foster shenanigans. We see Wilt's side of the story where we see him constantly help out others in need. And we even get an idea of what his backstory is. You see, Wilt was imagined by this kid who was obsessed with basketball, and he was definitely a star imaginary friend for being so good at the game. However, when a jealous kid saw Wilt, he imagined a bigger, tougher imaginary friend who's known for being good at basketball. During a huge match, Wilt unfortunately lost to the other friend, which really made his creator feel down about it. So Wilt's returning to his hometown to have a long-awaited rematch. What really works about this movie is that it does a great job explaining why Wilt is the way he is, in the mix of him just being a very helpful and kind friend who does put others before himself. He's just one of the most commendable friends, and him losing this game and disappointing his creator really let him down. It really puts into perspective why Wilt is like that. He let down the most important person in his life, so he has a lot of regret, and it's why he feels the need to be so apologetic. The good news is, we later find out that Wilt and his creator might have lost the game, but it was for the better, as Wilt actually saved the kid's life from being crushed by the other friend. It also explains how he got his stubby arm and wonky eye, which, yeah, that wasn't just the way he was imagined. He still put others before himself with that big loss, which ended up really making his kid feel remorse that he seemed more fixated on winning the game. Thus, they do eventually reunite, and we find out that this kid is none other than
Michael Jordan! Let's see if I remember how to do this.
Okay, it's not Michael Jordan, but it is Jordan Michael, which, yeah, it makes sense to me. It's honestly pretty great to see Wilt get this conclusion with his creator, and even was offered to stay with him. Wilt does decline, as he feels his destiny is to eventually be adopted to help out another kid who truly needs it. Though it's still a great TV movie for how it really makes us understand why Wilt is such a nice and cool character. The film is definitely one of the highlights of the entire Foster's series for me, and worth watching for sure when it comes to this show. Now we get to season 5 and 6 of the series, and I'll admit, I'm not quite as attached to some of these later Foster episodes compared to before. Not to say that I think these episodes are bad, but I hadn't watched them as much, and I say that's mainly due to the timing of these episodes' release. These episodes premiered during a time that I was somewhat going through a transitional period with media, as I slowly but surely started to be less fixated on watching TV and shows coming out on live television, including Cartoon Network. I started getting more into playing video games, shows, watching movies, and just spending a lot of time on the internet, especially with the advent of YouTube. Why wait for a certain show to come on when you have hundreds of hours to watch any video during your free time? In fact, one of the later episodes of Foster's does tackle the appeal of YouTube culture during that time period. Between this and the season 1 episode Worldwide Rabbit, it's fascinating to see how the trajectory of internet culture shifted during this series' lifespan. Though part of the reason why things shifted for me, and a lot of other people in terms of not getting invested in TV, was that this was also a transitional period for Cartoon Network themselves during the final season of Foster, as they started being more fixated on showing their newer TV shows. So I didn't catch Foster's as much when it was on, partially because they didn't air it as much compared to the brand new shows of that time. It also didn't help that this was when Cartoon Network was really starting to pan out into its new experimental phase of
real kids doing real stuff in real situations.
Yeah, we don't really talk about those times. Anyway, back to Foster's. These final seasons do have something interesting to note, as a lot of them focus less on the other friends and tend to focus more on the shenanigans Mac and Blue would get into. Not bad, though I do miss it, since the major appeal of Foster's was for how they introduced some new characters for a fun idea for an imaginary friend, yet we didn't get that as much in later seasons. However, certain background characters would get bigger roles in future episodes, which was kinda neat. Characters like Floppy Pants and Flutternutter, to name a few, were once characters who were mainly just kind of there, now had more prominent appearances in episodes. Probably the biggest example of a character who got a bigger role on the show was Jackie Combs, who's actually a pretty funny character in his own right. He was mostly there for fun, one-off jokes, but you see him a lot more in later episodes, and he even does his own little crime-solving cases, which is fun. He also has this strange vendetta against Wilt for some reason, though I say it's because he's jealous that Wilt was the more popular character voiced by Phil Lamar on the show compared to him.
Guy who says sorry so much must have done something.
The series would still consistently have some fun ideas, and would even do some interesting things later on that wasn't seen as much in shows of this caliber. Some of these include an episode where Mac and Blue race to Foster's, which actually had 2 endings, one where Mac wins, and the other where Blue wins. You don't see that often for a one-off episode. There's this interesting episode that takes place during the time of the Big Cheese, where they're all locked out of the house while Cheese knows the codes. This episode actually focuses on this little Pete character who's trapped inside the house while all of this is happening. Odd they picked such a random character to focus on, but I like the idea of episodes taking place during a different episode from a different character's perspective. I wish more shows did that. Plus, you have your typical enjoyable episodes, including one where there's a battle of the bands, and an actually pretty funny one where Blue somehow turns Mr. Herriman into this weird stoner hippie, and it's kind of hilarious to see this stick in the mud turn into this lazy bum.
Oh, I'm Harry. Mr. Herriman's my dad. Let me go get him. My dad.
Though probably the standout episodes of these last 2 seasons of Foster's for me are the episodes focusing on Blue Super Dude. Basically, they're more fantastical-like episodes where Blue is this badass warrior character, and it's strange science fiction fantasy action adventure where the characters are all amusing archetypes of this kind of story, and it's a blast to watch. The first one deals with Blue telling the story to Mac of the Super Dude teaming up with other friends about how they tried to retrieve this magic potato, which has a humorous punchline by the end of it. The second episode deals with Blue being sick and missing Mac's party, only to have this fever dream where he hallucinates being the Super Dude and tries to go to Mac's party, and it's entertaining as hell. These episodes make a lot of references to other pop culture science fiction stuff in neat ways. You get your typical Star Wars reference, but you also have a parody of the Flash Gordon theme song in the second episode by Queen. And they even make references to Zardoz of all things in that episode too. Yeah, Like, what kid in 2009 is going to know what Zardoz is?
The gun is good.
The gun is good!
The penis is evil.
The weird thing about the second Super Dude episode is that this premiered along with a few other episodes as the last one to air for the entire series. The final 5 episodes of Foster's aired all at once, and I wasn't aware of it when it premiered, partially because I wasn't watching much TV at that time and focused on other things. And they're not bad, however, I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of the actual final episode of the series, known as Goodbye to Blue. This episode, Blue finds out that Mac is actually moving away, according to Mr. Herriman. So Blue, knowing this, wants to make Mac's final moments at Foster's to be worthwhile, and the best. Though it turns into a conflict where Blue wants Mac to do more things, yet they're unable to because everyone else wants to hang out with Mac during his last moments. However, it turns out that Mac isn't necessarily moving. Well, he is, but not anywhere too far away. Mr. Herriman failed to mention that Mac is just moving into a different apartment complex. He did mention that Foster was going to have a lot of changes, and that's because his neighbor, Louise, is moving out of the apartment complex that he was originally a part of. And she happens to be moving somewhere that doesn't allow imaginary friends. Which means...
Now we're brother roomies!
I'm sorry, but this is not okay.
Yeah, I'm not too crazy about this finale. I don't know, something about it didn't click with me. The series ends with Cheese living at the house and everyone's annoyed by it, when I feel like there could have been a better way to end this series on a high note that's satisfactory towards all the characters. It leads to a disappointing finale, but honestly, I can't fault the team behind this show for it. After all, this was during the transitional period for Cartoon Network, like I mentioned. Not only Foster's, but many other great Cartoon Network shows like Billy and Mandy, Kids Next Door, Camp Lazlo, and even Ed, Ed and Eddie were all coming to an end. They were all wrapping up in the mix of Cartoon Network shifting their focus on
See and Real.
What's your name?
Seriously, what is this shit? Thank God for Adventure Time and regular show. So, maybe there was more ideas for a proper Foster finale. They just couldn't do one with this ship in focus for the network. So, with that being said, is this how I'm going to end this Foster's episode? On a relatively disappointing note with this bitter shift for CN? Is this video going to end with me just talking about how Foster's didn't get a proper series finale?
No, there is another.
That's right. If you ask me, I think the true series finale of this show is actually the TV movie Destination Imagination. Honestly, an excellent way for the show to end off. And I'll explain why. For starters, this third and final TV movie of Foster's is one centered around Frankie, which is already a great start considering, well, she's the best character in the whole series, as previously established. It shows how Frankie has been the main person around the house doing everything for the friends of Foster's, from chores, helping the friends out, and doing a bunch of different activities with these friends. It gets to a point where she barely has any time for herself, and it's starting to drain on her as she doesn't quite get the appreciation from the other friends for all the hard work she has done, especially Mr. Herriman, who, as usual, who is just the strict leader of the house, who barely helps Frankie. God, no wonder why I didn't like this dude as a kid. Things start changing when the house receives this mysterious chest that is dropped off at the front porch. Frankie ends up looking inside this chest to see what's it all about, and she finds out that there is an imaginary friend inside. Not just a friend though, she ends up discovering that this entire chest is actually an imaginary world that this friend is in charge of. This character is known as World, and he basically controls this entire place by being able to attach his face onto any random object within his domain, essentially being everything everywhere all at once. The good news is that Frankie is welcoming to this friend, and he treats her with the respect she ever so desires, as she's given a much needed break from all of her tasks. But even knowing she has to return to the house, World doesn't let her and essentially leaves her hostage there. Meanwhile, the house is getting out of hand with not having any work done with Frankie not being there, and Herriman certainly doesn't help as he just wants to be the boss, without really taking into account the friend's needs or actually doing anything worth of effort to help. So instead, Mac, Blue, Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco go into the chest to find Frankie in this crazy imaginary world. This special is one big adventure where the main heroes go through various obstacles in this crazy imagination land. It's pretty fun to see all these creative set pieces these characters get through, and along the way, they receive help from a few other characters in this world. However, it's later revealed that the imaginary friends was just one person. As it's revealed, it's the same friend holding Frankie hostage. And of course, chaos ensues. Meanwhile, Herriman is still running the house poorly by not giving in to the demands of the friends, and also just not being able to do a proper cleaning job. So he ends up going into the imagination world to find Frankie himself. We do later see the team reunite with Frankie, though it's revealed something that we assumed happened, but actually wasn't the case. As Frankie willingly stayed, she was never held hostage because she was feeling very unappreciative at Foster's home, never having any time to herself in order to give into the demands everyone in the house has. So naturally, she's kind of bitter about returning. And hey, with a boss as shitty as Mr. Herriman, I don't blame her. Though it's through this sequence, we actually see why Frankie is such a beloved character. As the world friend finds out about Frankie friends meeting her and freaking out. During all of this, we see Frankie confronting World himself instead of fighting him. She instead tries to cheer him up.
I'm not mad. You did what you did because you were scared and confused. I understand. It's okay to feel scared.
She totally realizes that World is only acting this way out of fear of losing his only friends, since he clearly experienced a loss of a friendship before. So she addresses his needs and reassures him that things can get better, and she'll help introduce the whole house to him. This is the kind of thing that makes Frankie such a great character. While she is an authority figure at the house too, she doesn't needlessly punish. She examines the root of the problem by seeing why the friends are acting this way in the first place. It leads to a better conclusion, and it's good for something like this, as Frankie probably deals with friends with tragic backstories on a daily basis. So to see that compassion come through in something like this is really charming. This is the kind of thing that makes this show understands kids better, by showing the consequences of being comforting and helping someone out who's upset, instead of needlessly punishing them. As Lord and behold, Herriman comes in and fucks everything up.
You, young man, are a bad boy. Luring a naive young woman into this silly little imaginary world and keeping her from her duties.
He instead becomes demanding and harsh compared to Frankie's approach, which really gives this kid major anxiety. It showcases that you should be more careful when trying to punish your kids, as if you're being too assertive and mean towards everything you deem as a misdemeanor, it could really mess up a kid's mental state. Especially if it's something that's a misunderstanding or something that can easily be reasoned out. Frankie's handling of this situation was the right way, as thanks to Mr. Herriman, they get into one big final chase sequence.
Good heavens, what's happening?
You picked him up! That's what's happening!
After a big final battle, we see them all back in the attic outside the chest, but Frankie is still willing to go back to help the friend, to the others' dismay. However, it's Herriman who ends up trusting her to go in, and it actually leads to my favorite moment dealing with this character in the entire series.
And all that time, I was wrong. If Miss Francis thinks allowing the imaginary friend into the house is a good idea, I trust her judgment.
Wow! That is genuinely great of you. Herriman learns from Frankie that her direction is the way to go, and you know, I really appreciate when a character can really admit to when they were wrong the whole time. Especially for someone as much of a stickler as Mr. Herriman. This was satisfying. This is why, Frankie, you win as best character. Thankfully, Frankie's choice to go back panned out well, as she finally made World get out of his comfort zone and become more open to making friends. Not only that, but Herriman and Frankie decide on new house rules where everyone has to pitch in on chores in order to not overload Frankie. It pans out pretty well as the friends do their chores in order to have free time. And this right here, I think, is the proper ending to this series. It's such a satisfying conclusion seeing Frankie get the respect she deserves. Herriman realizing the errors of his ways, and the friends feeling more equal than ever, is a perfect way to end it. Just seeing them all recreate the intro and the film's final moments to the chess box just feels so right. It's a great way to end this series, having them play in this crazy world, leaving them all to pretty much be happily ever after. Except for Madam Foster, who's been left behind in the post-credits scene.
Hello?
Oh well, leave the old broad. Now let's talk a bit about the impact Foster's has had on Cartoon Network, because this series was relatively popular during its run. It was never a mega hit like the Powerpuff Girls or Adventure Time. I don't think it even reached Ed, Edd and Eddy or regular show status, but it definitely had a lasting impact. It was a huge part of Cartoon Network's identity at the time of its run, being heavily promoted as one of the channel's most popular shows. I think what helped was the contribution of longtime Cartoon Network showrunners being a part of Foster's, making this series still feel familiar, as it definitely was one of the last true classic Cartoon Network shows. As for Foster's popularity, the series had plenty of other things to make it have a little bit of consciousness in the pop culture. There were video games, a couple of DVDs, a lot of shirts you would see at like Hot Topic, a Burger King tie-in, and a ton of merchandise that gave Foster some staying power. Probably the biggest recognition the show got was from 2006 to 2008 during the Macy Thanksgiving Parade. They would have their own float. The Foster float was really cool, as you see numerous characters from the series as puppets. Wilt, Eduardo, Coco, and even Blue and Cheese all appearing at one of the biggest parades of the year. They would sing some sort of song pertaining to friendship, and honestly, as a kid, this was really cool to see.
Oh, you make me live now, honey. Oh, you make me live.
During the time of Cartoon Network's transitional period, I was growing through one of my own growing up in middle school and about to go into high school. I'll admit, I certainly wasn't the most popular kid at that time, and I felt a bit left out during that period. At the time, I was seen as the kid who likes cartoons, and it was starting to be seen as less cool, and I never understood why. I don't get why we need to abandon an art form just because we're getting older. And this series was definitely one of the shows I felt comfortable watching at a relatively rough time for me socially. Seeing the series get some mainstream representation was honestly kinda cool. To see how a show I liked so much that wasn't the most popular thing get this much attention showed that there are surely some people who appreciate this show out there as much as I did, and I know they existed. You probably feel this way about other things you like as a kid, or hell, maybe you're even younger and watching this video feeling left out that other people can't share the same connection with the love of the thing you love. Some may even ridicule you for it if it's something like animation or seems weird to like in any capacity, but just to reassure you, there will always be people out there. There will always be an audience for practically any movie, show, or whatever, even if it doesn't feel like it. Even if it doesn't seem like that now, it will be more apparent as time goes on. I always meet people who talk about how much they love this show as well, thanks to nostalgia being a powerful thing, and the advent of the internet keeping everyone connected. Sure, not everyone enjoys this series. I think some felt certain characters like Blue were a bit too mean for their own good. But it also doesn't change the fact that there were other people who shared this love for the show as well. There are people similar to me who found appreciation in the show that talks about never fully abandoning your childhood memories. They shape you for who you are. And as the series mentioned, in a world where adults have a ton of responsibilities, it makes you reflect on the time you were able to more often do the most awesome of awesome things. I think being able to share that kind of experience with people who would eventually be friends, also having that connection of imaginary friends who felt real to them on TV, makes being a fan of something like this all the more worth it. Though before I give some final thoughts, if I'm going to be bringing up the Macy Thanksgiving Parade and their contribution to it, I don't think this video would be complete if I failed to mention this iconic television moment.
People, let me tell you about me, so much fun.
Aw, yeah. And because of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, the meme will never die.
Did you finish all your chores? All right. I guess we can go for a little bit. But no running!
So after nearly 20 years since it first came out, what's been the impact and future for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends? Well, it's still remembered fairly fondly among longtime viewers of Cartoon Network. The cast and crew look at it fondly. You still see the characters make brief anniversary appearances, and you still get the occasional talk about the show. Granted, sometimes it's to discuss why Blue is such a jerk, but other times it's to discuss the nostalgic memories and fun episodes this series had to offer. Weirdly enough, there is set to be a new Foster's animated series on Cartoon Network with Craig McCracken and Lauren Foss still attached, though the series is set to be more geared towards little kids this time around, as opposed to how the original series panned out. While it wouldn't quite be the direction I personally would have gone if I did a revival, I always felt Foster's could have potentially worked as a years later sequel, with Mac being older and how he deals with Blue as an adult. It could have some potential. But I'm sure this new series for a younger audience will be fine, as long as they still showcase a lot of the creativity the original series had to offer. I can see this being a decent introduction to a new generation of kids, and thankfully you can watch this series now on good old HBO Max. Oh wait, it was removed from the service for no reason. Well, there's a DVD, and other means of watching it at least, though. Let's hope it gets back to streaming proper at some point. Especially if the series is going to have a reboot within a few years. Please make streaming not a shit show, corporate executives, and let people's work be seen. Oh, and while you're at it, pay your writers and actors too, you cowards. As for Foster's itself, this show still holds up as a personal favorite of mine. Sure, you can argue other Cartoon Network shows have stronger characters and episodes as a whole, but Foster's represents a lot of what I look for in an animated series. Its expressive characters, funny moments, and enjoyable episodes really made one that I came back to a lot as a kid. But more importantly, I think Foster's represents what it means to never fully leave your childhood behind. Sure, there are things you can mature from, and this series shows that at many points, but it also talks about how you shouldn't fully abandon everything you've learned or know about as a kid. There's a lot of humanity and character that can be seen at a young age. The kind of stuff that makes life a lot more exciting compared to the mundane nature of being an adult. There's an innocent nature of just learning to enjoy your time with your friends and not take things for granted when younger. Childhood is the ultimate time of doing the most awesome of awesome things, and this series is an excellent reminder of stuff like that. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friend came at a decent time in my life where I was discovering more of my interests and other things I love. And one thing for certain, this is one of those shows that will stick with me. A show with so much personality to it is proof that a show with friends like these can never really be forgotten due to the imagination they can bring to audiences who clamor for what an animated series can do. So take that for what it's worth.
Okay, please! That is enough of this silly nonsense!